Okay, so number one is pretty straightforward. It has to do with putting together the motor mounts for the Axial XR10. Utilizing parts from bag A, you can see that you actually have the shaft here that's going to be driving the gear, and also the motor plate, okay? But one of the things that Axial has mentioned right out of the gate, and I'll actually show you right here on their blog site, is that you want to cut the motor plate a little notch in it for easy removal later on. You can actually see this part right here where the green is has been cut out so you can remove the axle later on simply through ease of use. Guys can find this on the team driver site or the blog for Axial Racing. So I'm actually going to do that here right on camera for you just really quick. You don't have to do this. This is actually just a team driver mod to make things a little simpler if you're going to be switching things out. Okay, for this operation I will be using a Dremel with just a small cutting bit on the side. Of course I already have my safety glasses on. Okay, so with a modified motor mount, I've actually already put in the gear shaft and the bearing that's going into the first slot. Slide the second bearing into the second slot there and you're ready to go with the actual drive gear. Now notice the drive gear has a slot on one side. This is basically so you can be putting the drive pin in. The drive pin is also supplied. Simple, you put it in the first hole and line it up with the drive gear and put it into place. Now it's not locked there, but it is secure and does turn the drive shaft. Last thing you're going to need here is of course this little C-clip goes on the end and on to step number 2. Step 2 is very straightforward. It goes on to show how to attach the idler gear with the C-clip and the drive pin behind it, as well as a ball bearing right on the back of the gear shaft. Now you also introduce a part from plastic bag 1. You can see it has the mount on it. There is another one that's similar but that does not have the mount right there. So you'll know you have the right one by identifying it like that. This also fits securely into place. You can see that when it's mounted properly there is no rub in there, so we can move on to step number 3. So we're introducing some new gears here in step number 3. Basically I've already put in the shaft with the small tooth gear. It does require a drive pin, so I'm going to just put that in there right now, just like so. Take a second flanged bearing that's provided in bag A, pop it into place, and just pop in the secondary drive gear, like so. Now I see the drive pin has to be lined up almost perfectly in sync with this for it to be seated, of course, but on the back side you'll notice that it's different. See, the slots are different. So notice that this one has a small arrow near the top. That is what is supposed to be face forward. So I'll line it up on the bottom, get that into place, and now I've got a nice gear mesh. Time to get out the marine grease and make sure this is well lubricated. So I've moved ahead and actually assembled a little bit of the housing that goes onto the gear mesh. I've also lined the gears with a thin layer of marine grease. Now I prefer marine grease. Yes, Axial actually does send grease along with the kit, but the longevity and the life of this and the heat dispersion qualities of this type of grease I thoroughly enjoy. You can normally pick it up in any hardware store. So I've gone ahead, you've actually had to put a small nut right inside the housing here to prepare for the cohesion between the screw and this housing, of course, as well as I've already seated the 3 bearings for the mesh shroud. Okay, so you can see here it just fits on really easily like this after you've clicked the housing into place. Okay, so I've got a little bit of overspill of the marine grease, not a big deal. Now make sure to watch the size of the screws that you need. For this you need 2 screws. The longer one actually goes on the outer right hand side, and of course the shorter one, if you follow the instruction book, actually sends it right there. This is a 2mm hex bit, so you just go ahead, screw it in with the screwdriver, and away you are. On to the next step where we're going to be putting in the electric motor. So let's get the Team Tekin motor out and we'll look at setting the mesh. Remember, when using the set screw for your pinion to put onto the motor shaft, to use the supplied Loctite. The last thing you need when this is spinning super fast is for that little set screw to come out. Make sure to be using blue Loctite because it is removable. When you use red, it's basically like super glue. So good pointer right there. It'll save you some time later on. So make sure you have the right screws out. We can see that if you make sure your axle housing is the right one first of all, and that the elbows are on top, you're actually going to be mounting the motor and the axle together just like so, or the axle housing. So you can see the holes here, 1, 2, 1 in the back there. You got to use these screws. Make sure you're using the right length and the right type of screws. I think these are the 465s and the 467 types. One's a 15 millimeter screw, the other's, these two here are 10 millimeters. Want to make sure these are nice and tight, but not too tight. You don't want to over tighten them. I'm just going to put these into place so we can see here quickly that that bottom gear is still showing through, okay? Now, you might not be able to spin it, obviously, because of the motor, the way it's set up with the pinion gear, but let's move on to the next step once I tighten these up. So I'm just going to go ahead here. I've got the bearings on now just by using a little bit of lubrication, no problem. Got a little dab of grease on here to make sure everything is lubed and making sure the direction is correct, which would be the whole side to the back. Let's seat that. I've put 2 of the ball bearings on either side like it requests, but in bag B there is 1, 2, 3, 4 different sets of bearings. This one, these outside 2, and 2 different types of ones. Make sure you're watching the size because that is important. Direction is everything in this build. It is in every build, but of course this one specifically, okay? So there. You can see this firms and cinches up quite nicely. Everything's in place. I want to talk about the plastic for a second. It is very rigid. It's it feels different than the other axial plastic. I wonder if it's just a different mixture, but it sure feels solid. Okay, so time to move on to the very important screws. Now we have to make sure that we get this right. As I'm talking to you, I'm kind of looking and glancing over to the instruction book just to make sure I've got the direction right for you guys. Okay, so just like I did here, long, shorter. This one here is just shorter than that, and of course the shortest. Section 9 is still working with hardware from bag B. 4 of these smaller screws, these are the 433s, the 466s, there's 2 of those, and 1 of the 434s. So make sure you have your screws lined out properly. You'll want to see that this actually has to do with the hub carriers. A short line on top, a longer line on the bottom, so make sure you're putting these on properly. You'll also see on the inside, you can't see kinda, that it is ribbed. Okay, so there you can see right there it's ribbed. Same with the end of the axle housings. Okay, there's a screw hole right there, and you want to make sure to line it up properly on each side. Now they can be a little bit of a challenge, but if you're careful, you'll get both lined up just properly, okay? So time to put the axles in. Off camera, I went ahead and tightened up all the screws that needed to be done. I also attached the front servo plate, okay? Just saving us a little bit of time while we're building here. Now it's time to install the axles into the axle housing. Really straightforward. All you have to do is be careful and watch the direction of what you're doing, okay? Just nice and easy, and it turns right into place. You can see it fit right in, and you can feel it grab on that inside gear that we had there. Same with this side. Push it in, turn it gently, and it just slides right in. So piece of cake. Now, to hold those in place, you actually need to be using some steering knuckles. Now, if you watch the direction of these as well, because you got to be sure you're doing this stuff right, I've already gone ahead and lubricated the 2 bearings for the outside, and I'll lubricate these bearings for the inside in a moment. So, pop them into place, just put a blob in there. Now you got to remember, you don't want to over lubricate these. I'm probably putting in too much grease right now, I already know that, but it is a new build, and the reason why is you're going to get dust and rocks and dirt in there, and yes, it will get sticky, but I would rather have a little bit too much grease than not enough at all and be squealing across the rock course. Okay, so there we go. A little bit slippery, not a big deal. So here's something I just noticed that I didn't show you guys about a step and a half ago. This bar right here, I didn't quite understand what it meant in the instruction book, but now I've figured it out. There's actually an area in the case before you put this together to put this steering rod in, okay? But I got around this really easy. I just undid the 4 little screws here, backed them off a little bit. This part slid in just perfect, okay? There is an area for it to slide back and forth. I know it's tough to see. But this is actually going to line up with the steering knuckles to turn the front of the truck. So anyway, if you do that, it's really simple, takes only a second. So through the magic of camera work, I've gone ahead and already assembled these turnbuckles, okay? Now I've also gone ahead and started to pre-turn these long screws. These holes are a little bit small to start with, so I got them started so we can get these turnbuckles attached quicker. Now for longer screws like this, I don't mind using a small drill gun. It holds these hex bits really easy. You can see this is the brand I use. Runs on a small LiPo battery, I think, actually. So I'll line these up properly and we'll get these turned into place. Okay, on the smaller side, on this bar that we inserted here, on the steering bar, we're going to want to use a small bit of thread lock on the screws. So they supply thread lock for you, so just a dab will do ya. Okay, same on either side. And of course, we'll get these turned into place too. Alright, the front axle and motor assembly is completed for the XR10. You can see here that the Team Tekin motor that I chose has been installed and is mounted on the axle housing. The steering servo plate is now in place and the steering knuckles and assembly have been completed. Everything's been lubricated and tightened up, so it's up to my standards. Steps 12 to 25 basically deal with assembling the rear axle, and I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera. For the next video, we'll see exactly what the differences are between the two axles, as well as starting to put the suspension together.